the angels were commanded to prostrate to Adam, not in prostration to the flesh of Adam. It's not, the point of the story is not that God made Adam with a nose and ears and a mouth and eyes because he himself has a nose and an ear and a mouth and eyes.
Okay, I think I understand the likeness, you know, what the deeper meaning of making mankind in the likeness of God would be, right? It's not the physical.
It's not the physical. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد إلى ما المهدينا وسلم تسليما. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My dear sister and companion, Tiffany.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, dear Father.
Thank you for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me here.
So today I want to talk to you about something which is a little bit interesting to me, and that is this whole idea or concept of worshiping through images. And worshiping through images is something which I think is very prominent, not only in the ancient polytheistic religions, but also within the Western traditions or religions of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam.
Okay.
I think if we take the Bible as we know it now, the one that includes the New Testament and the Old Testament, we'll find that there is something very interesting. The book of Genesis starts off with this scene where basically God creates Adam and Eve in his image. All right. So there's this making of an image and worship that's associated with the image of God, which is Adam and Eve now, in particular Adam, when God commands in the apocryphal sources and also of Christianity and Judaism, but also in the religion of Islam and the Quran, when God demands of the angels that they worship him through this image that he is created, which is the image of Adam. We find in the very end of the Bible, in the book of Revelation, we also find that there is this creation of an image, and albeit it's thought to be like a bad thing or a bad notion, where it's like the beast creates the image of the first beast, right? Mm-hmm. And he demands the people to worship it. But what I'm referring to here is the notion of the existence of that same concept within the book of Revelation. So the Bible starts off with the creation of an image that's associated with worship, or that's being introduced as that method of worship. And we have the very end of the Bible in the book of Revelation. We also have the concept of the creation of an image and worship that's associated with it. So how do we make sense of this, and how does it relate to our view of religion today? That's what I would like to engage in a conversation with you today about.
Okay, wow, that's a very interesting topic. Yeah, you're right. The Bible does start with that. You know, God does create mankind in his image. And yeah, as you said, it ends with the same concept, albeit it's shown in sort of a different light. So yes, it is an interesting conversation.
When we look at ancient Roman religion, ancient Greek religion, the ancient Egyptian religion, the various different religions that kind of spurred up or spawned throughout human history, actually religions all across the entire globe, we find that for the majority of them, you have one thing that is in common, right? Because you either have polytheistic religions or religions that are considered to be polytheistic, and that depend a lot on the worship of a plethora or a multitude of gods. And then you have these monotheistic religions that focus on worshiping one God. Now, we've already stated that within these monotheistic religions, namely Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, we have the creation of this image. So what about polytheistic religions? And I think that it's interesting that all across the globe, you have these polytheistic religions depending a lot on the creation of idols or the creation of images for the purpose of worship. And you have tons of temples and houses of worship that were built all across the world throughout human history, in which in these houses or temples, they housed in particular rooms, or sometimes the entire structure would just be one room, and it would house a particular idol or a statue, an image that was created of a particular god. And the people would go in there and they would make offerings to these statues or offerings to these gods. And a lot of the time, they would offer images as well of things that they needed cured. For example, if somebody had a problem with hearing, they would go over to the idol and they might offer the idol a statue or a mold of an ear. If somebody had an issue with their nose, right, they would offer the idol in a statue of their nose or of their hand or of their feet or of their legs. And so we have here images in connection to worship and beseeching certain favors from the gods. Another thing that I think is very interesting is the fact that a lot of these gods that were sculpted and created, you would find them in not just in the images of human beings, but you would find them being created in the image of particular animals. Why was that? Why do they have, especially in ancient Egypt, a lot of gods that were created, for example, with the head of a lion, or in the image of a bull, or with the head of a crocodile, etc.? And the answer to that is that the ancient Egyptians would basically reflect upon creation. And when they would find particular divine traits, or what they considered to be divine traits in animals or in images that they saw in real life, they would consider that these images that embodied these characteristics or these virtues or these attributes to be manifestations of the divine, or manifestations of one of the particular gods that they would worship.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It makes sense. And you find it also in, like in India, when you were talking about the animal deities, I was thinking of Ganesha as like an elephant. Yeah, it's something that you find, common. It is a point of commonality between different, what we know as polytheistic religions. And it would make sense if this is the origin of that.
So the ancient polytheists, I guess it would be correct to say that they were not human beings that looked and saw, for example, an elephant, or looked and saw a bird, or looked and saw a lion, and they thought to themselves, this is the Almighty God. But rather, they saw these animals as being manifestations of the divine God. At least that's how it started, and at least that's how the more educated thinkers amongst society considered the religion to be.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Now, I think that when knowing all of that, that's very interesting to me because of the concept which was discussed in Imam Ahmed al-Hassan alayhi salam's book, the Book of Monotheism. And Imam Ahmed al-Hassan alayhi salam, he wrote this book, and the book was called the Book of Monotheism because he said that monotheism is the most sacred and the most important science in all of creation. Like, it is the epitome of all things that a believer should pursue, because it has to do with the very foundation of religion. Whoever gets their monotheism correct, they are a true believer. And and we know from many narrations from Muhammad and the family of Muhammad that polytheism, or shirk, is so hidden sometimes that a person cannot even recognize it. And the Quran says that most of the people die while or go through life, having worshipped other things in addition to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So they worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but at the same time, it's not free of worship of the devil. Alongside with it. And Muhammad and the family of Muhammad said that shirk is quieter than the footsteps of an ant in the middle of a dark night, right? So it's impossible to hear the footsteps of an ant, right? Especially if it's dark outside and there's no source of light. That's how hidden polytheism can be. And that's why it's so important that we examine. And that's why he wrote this book of monotheism, so that it be a shining light that he can shed for all mankind. In the book of monotheism, Ahmad al-Hassan explains that if we are searching for God, if we're talking about the ultimate source of all things, okay? The God of all gods, the King of all kings, right? The source of creation that everybody complains about because he was so absent and everybody is searching for, and so much confusion has arisen. Where is he? What is he? Ahmad al-Hassan explains that God himself is above being described. And this is something that we know in Islamic sources. And it's not just something that we know in Islamic sources. It's also something that we know from Christian and especially Judeo sources. God, it is polytheism, it is wrong, it is bad, it is sinful to attribute or think about God in any way that we think of anything that is present in this physical world.
Yes, even the name and all of these things, they're actually they become a form of idol worship, right? If you're worshiping the name of God instead of the thing which is beyond the name, then it becomes like a form of idol worship.
Exactly. So he is above description. There is no color that we see with our eyes that we can apply to him. There's no shape that we see in our world that we can confine him to or describe him. Because once we apply to him any characteristic or title that we have in this world, we have limited his very nature, and he is by nature unlimited. Okay, here things have a beginning and they have an end. God has no beginning and he has no end. Here we are limited by time and space. We're confined in particular structures. So we are held captive in our bodies. God is unlimited. There is nothing that can confine him. He is everywhere and yet nowhere at the same time, right? He is working and resting together. He is, always was, and always will be. Okay? Is the concept clear?
Yes, it's clear.
Good, alhamdulillah. So how does a being like that make himself known to lesser entities that he has created? This became the big question. How is this relationship established between God, the infinite, and between creatures that are finite? How can this happen? Imam Ahmad al-Hassan explains that this God of gods, who no title is even appropriate to give him, the only thing that we can describe him truly by is huwa. Huwa just means he, right? Yeah. And this is kind of confirmed also in the Torah, in the encounter which he had with Moses, in which Moses asks him, "Who shall I tell the Israelites sent me?" And he says, "I am that I am," right? Because there's no other word that would truly be appropriate for who he is, right? Or to describe him. No descriptions can fit him. And we have narrations from Muhammad and the family of Muhammad. And I just want to emphasize on this because lest people have any sort of doubt regarding this point before we move on. There are narrations from Muhammad and the family of Muhammad which describe not God, but paradise itself. And they state that in paradise are things that no eye has ever seen, okay? And sounds that no ear has ever heard, right? And things that things that have never crossed any mind, no mind has ever thought of. Okay? It's that different. It's beyond description. It's not like anything that we have here. When we describe paradise with human terms, we're only doing so in order that other people may understand a concept that we're trying to explain, right? Yes. It's kind of like Plato's cave, the allegory, right? When all they saw on the wall were these shadows that were crossing by, right? Yeah. And the shadows, he knows that this is the image of a man, this is the image of a bird, this is the image of whatever was being projected on the wall. But the prisoner, once he escaped outside, to be able to come back in and describe all of the magnificent colors and the beauty and the light of the outside to the people that were in, it's impossible to do so with the words that they know. Yes.
It's it's a very important allegory, and it makes a lot of sense. Yeah.
Good. So how did God make himself known to creation? He had to manifest as something. And so we have the birth of this idea of manifestations. He manifests as something, but he is something that is beyond form, something that is not physical. And so he has to also, even his manifestation becomes something that is without form and something which is non-physical. What does he manifest himself as? Imam Ahmad Hassan says, he manifests himself as this idea that you and I, Jews, Christians, and Muslims have of the word God or Allah.
Okay.
That's what he manifests himself as. Why? Because when we think of God, we think of good. God is good, but he is something. His goodness is so great that it's even beyond the word of good. Good is not an adequate term to describe his goodness, and so he had to manifest at least as good for us to know.
Okay. So there's a limit on our ability to understand the attributes of God.
Even the attributes of God themselves would be in some way, shape, or form not as unlimited as he himself, the truth and reality, is. Okay? And so God became this word that encompassed and meant for mankind a collection of traits, virtues, attributes that were good. God is merciful. God is loyal. God is benevolence. God is all-hearing, all-knowing, all-seeing. God is the sustainer. God is the carer, right? He's the giver. He's all of that which is good and all of that which mankind aspires to be. Okay?
Yeah.
Good. Now, after this initial step of manifesting as, from he to this other image, we can say, of himself, and the image is the image of God with all of these attributes or characteristics, he had to, in order to be known by man, further manifest himself. Now, God, the word God with all of these characteristics, had to present itself and manifest itself in a human being. Because unless we saw these concepts in practice, we would not be able to fully grasp them or understand how can they be implemented or how can they function in day-to-day life.
Right, absolutely. I mean, how can you know what goodness is if you have never seen goodness, shining to the fullest extent that we can know it? You would have to have an example in order to know it. And it makes a lot of sense. I mean, it's like what you were describing earlier when humanity would observe certain attributes in the animals and they thought that these were, extraordinary qualities and they tied it to the divine. Of course, we have to have an example in front of our eyes in order that we understand the concepts.
Exactly. And here comes into play the very creation of Adam himself. Okay? So the angels didn't understand, and they objected, according to the Quran, to the very creation of Adam. They didn't understand why was God doing this. And God said, verily, I know that which you don't know.
Yes.
And what was it that God knew? God knew that this being that he was creating, Adam, the first human being, had the capability and had within him the Spirit of God, right? God says, when I blow into him of my Spirit, then fall down into prostration. What was the Spirit that was blown into him? It was the Spirit of God. What is God? A collection of all of these divine virtues and characteristics.
Yes.
So now Adam becomes a walking, talking, breathing, living example of all of the divine virtues of God. That's why we have narrations that say that the gazing upon the face of Ali ibn Abi Talib, for example, is worship, right? Alayhi salam. Why? Because Ali ibn Abi Talib, alayhi salam, like Adam, was a manifestation, a living, breathing example or image of God in creation.
Yes.
Okay?
Yeah.
Whereby if people emulated or watched, contemplated over, interacted with, they would be able to interact with the divine. That's why the angels were commanded to prostrate to Adam, not in prostration to the flesh of Adam.
Yeah.
It's not, the point of the story is not that God made Adam with a nose and ears and a mouth and eyes because he himself has a nose and an ear and a mouth and eyes.
Okay. I think I understand the likeness, you know, what the deeper meaning of making mankind in the likeness of God would be, right? It's not the physical.
It's not the physical. It's that, like, he is merciful and he created Adam merciful. Okay. He is kind, he created Adam kind. Yeah. He is wise, he created Adam to be wise, right? So all of those characteristics of God, Adam also has those things. And when the angels are prostrating, they're prostrating because he is such a shining example of all these characteristics, right, and virtues, that they had to just bow down in awe in recognition that God's at play here. He's operating through this creature.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's really important to understand. And yeah, it makes sense.
That is our religion, and that's the importance of it, because here we have God being present in creation. As he said, he was a hidden treasure, and he created creation in order that they may know him. And here's the method which he provides that creation gets to know him. He manifests himself as images, and the most perfect of all images in creation is always present, is always shining, is always there, so that people may emulate, interact with, and become more like God. It's not just that the rest of creation or the angels were to prostrate to Adam and just be his servant. No, the proofs of Allah, according to Imam Ahmad al-Hassan, did not come to the earth, were not sent to the planet, except to serve the sons of man. How can you serve the sons of man? By helping them become more like God. And that is monotheism. Monotheism is recognizing who is the image of God in your time. And then after you recognize who it is, then you become an embodiment of that. We worship God through becoming an image of him.
Yes. Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. It makes a lot of sense.
Okay. So now we know that the worship of God and the religion itself of God is a religion of worship through imagery, we could say, right?
Yes.
By recognizing his image and working to make ourselves an image of God versus an image of the devil or of something else. And that takes us to the book of Revelation. And it takes us to what's going on over there. Now, if we submit to this idea that the first beast is the Antichrist and the second beast is the false prophet, and the false prophet creates an image of the Antichrist for the people to worship, or an image of Satan for the people to worship, even though we're going to do a very special, exciting episode on the book of Revelation and its true meanings in this time. But let's put that aside for a minute and let's just discuss it in the way that the people understand it to be.
Okay.
If that is the case, then what that would mean is that we have somebody who appears at a particular time, and although the people think that he is an embodiment of the virtues of God, except that he is an embodiment of the virtues of the devil, the anti-God. And people just fail to kind of recognize that. And so they end up worshiping the Antichrist by admiring these and idolizing these virtues that are actually bad.
Oh.
And they themselves become images of the Antichrist, or images of this image, and they walk behind it.
Oh, wow. That's very interesting. Yeah, so like whatever the attributes of God are, it would be sort of the opposite of that. So if God is generous, then this would be like
selfishness.
Exactly, selfishness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If God puts the other first, like Jesus did, then this one might say me first, my country first, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If God basically prioritizes, spiritual knowledge, this would be more prioritizing the material and running after the dunya, right?
Yeah.
And people might be fooled to think that this is a good thing, and this is what, then they might preach that this is what God expects from us to do, to get a good job so that we can buy nice things for ourselves and be worried about a physical material life,
right, and take care of our own self and not the other human being. Wow.
If God is the one who appoints the ruler, then this image might idolize and preach and teach the virtues of people being able to pick their own leader.
Yes.
So it's like the anti-image, but it's presenting itself as an image of the Almighty God.
That's mind-blowing. But yes. Yeah, I mean, these verses certainly can be understood like that. It's so crazy, the level of deception. And of course, we know that the Antichrist is meant to be a great deceiver, right? So the level of that deception is astonishing, that what we know to be the opposite of the attributes of God could be then preached as, something divine and something to be emulated by the people.
Absolutely.
Wow.
And so here now we find the true meaning of the creation of Adam in God's image. We find the true meaning of the creation of an image of Satan, and certainly that is true according to all of the religions, that Satan does send his son, and this son is like a false messiah, a false teacher, an antichrist, a dajjal. And there's not just one of them, there's many of them. And so we find the problem with not recognizing or being able to distinguish the true virtues of God, and where people might go astray in that, and the great deception of Satan's religion in the end times. But we also understood today the way that the polytheists, although they initially might have had a correct understanding of the recognition of the divine characteristics of God in creation, except that they went astray by looking for it in the wrong places. And we have a narration that's very special that states that after Satan refused to worship God through the prostration to Adam, that he sought to make that up. And he told God, please exempt me from prostrating to Adam, and I will worship you in any veil that you take. And so Satan went forth, the narration says, and he prostrated to the sun, and he prostrated to the moon, and he prostrated to the trees, and he prostrated to the animals. He prostrated to everything that exists without and except for Adam himself. And based off of that, we can see that it eventually progressed into these polytheistic religions, where mankind also, in the same way as Satan did, began to look for God behind veils other than the veil that they should have been looking for him behind. And so they, rejected Joseph the manifestation of God in that time, but they worshipped the crocodile god, or they worshipped, and looked for God's virtues within the animals. And the same thing with Buddha in his time, the same thing with Krishna in his time, the same thing with the various prophets and messengers that were sent to the peoples throughout history.
Wow. Wow. I mean, that's so fascinating. And it really makes a lot of sense that we have that narration that says, if you have died without knowing the Imam of your time, you've died the death of ignorance, because this is actually, the true way to practice monotheism is by recognizing that which God, sent forward and gave his Holy Spirit to, and how he shines forth to humanity. And this is how we are able to know God. And any other form of worship is association, and it's polytheism, really.
Exactly. And that's what our religion is seeking right now, to propagate this idea that God had placed all these virtues in Adam, but there's sparks of it. There's sparks of God's light within each and every human being. And there's also a lot of darkness, a lot of ignorance. And the more that we are able to embody within ourselves the virtues of God, we become more and more like God, until we become his will and his hand and his face within creation. We become a manifestation of him in creation by emulating the perfect image of God and becoming ourselves a perfect image of God. And this is not an easy thing to do in this day and age, when you're living in a world that's surrounded by darkness. But that is what we are preaching, and that's what we are calling for. And that's why we have also formed the community that we have formed, in order that we may live with one another, fellow human beings that share our belief, and we are able to provide for them. We can be able to be sustainers for them. We can be able to be helpers for them. We can be generous to them. We can be merciful to them. We can be loving to them, so that we can be vessels that actually God's love and his sustenance and his mercy travels through us to the rest of mankind. And we are rejecting the false virtues of selfishness and betrayal and ignorance that so many of the other governments and nations are practicing right now. And so we are people that have found God in creation, a perfect image of him, the Hujjah of Allah, the Imam of the time, and we ourselves are receiving the divine sustenance that is flowing through him to us. And we ourselves are becoming like him, vessels for that divine sustenance and light and those virtues to shine out of us towards the rest of creation. And by doing so, we form a gigantic divine community around us, so that will continue to shine brighter and brighter until it puts out all of the darkness on the face of the earth.
Wow, that is so beautiful. Thank you so much for the opportunity to understand this, and to put my faith into practice, and to be in this community that you have formed, and to try and let God's light shine through myself, and through our community as a whole. Thank you so much.
God bless you. Thank you so much for joining me, Tiffany. And it's been a while since we filmed any of these Divine Mysteries episodes, but we also have a duty to answer all of the questions that the believers have. So we'll be filming. I just want to remind the viewers that we will be filming more episodes here, and we will be filming more episodes in each and every one of the other playlists, inshallah, that are on the channel. God bless you, and thank you so much.
In the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, it says, the Tao that can be named is not the true Tao. And this is what we find to be true of God. That which can be named is not the entire essence of God. God can only be known through an image. And in essence, this means that religion is a form of idol worship. And the question then becomes, which idol are you worshiping? Are you worshiping the godly image, the image which God made and gave his spirit to? Or are you worshiping something animalistic, or are you worshiping something satanic? In the end, this is something that everybody has to be honest with their own selves about. And the goal of religion is to find the image made in God's likeness, just like it is written in the scriptures, and to emulate that and to let your light shine and to become like that. So that is the goal of religion. And I think that now everybody has to investigate their own selves and find out which image are you worshiping.